Hi guys, welcome to Dubs Only Sports. This is episode 41. Before we get into anything, make sure to follow us on our social medias. We've got TikTok, Instagram, Twitter at Dubs Only Sports, and make sure to watch the full episodes just like this one on YouTube and on Spotify. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so that you get that notification every single time that we upload. Leave a comment how you feel, whatever. Now, college football preseason rankings have come out. Where within the month of college football to start, thank God. And these preseason rankings aren't necessarily the rankings that truly matter. They're just kind of there to give us some sort of indication as to where the committee is leaning to put all of these teams. And yet again, they have fumbled the bag, they have messed it up, and we are here to essentially fix the preseason rankings. Now, off the bat, I think it's pretty safe to say that the first five teams on there, well, the first four teams on there is an accurate statement. We've got Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama. Those four teams make sense. They're good teams year in and year out, especially Michigan, who had a chance at the college football playoff last year and blew it against TCU, but now are coming back with an even bigger chip on the shoulder, coming back even stronger than they were last year with JJ McCarthy. So that makes sense. Georgia literally won the national championship. Ohio State was in the run for the national championship, as well as Alabama, but they both got fleeced by TCU because what the committee likes to do is they like to have that one team that's involved in the college football playoff that really doesn't deserve to be there. And that's why they got blown out by Georgia in the championship game. So now with this introduction of the new 12-team playoff, we will have those teams like TCU that really don't belong in there, but it'll be more believable because they'll be, instead of being the 3 or the 2 seed or the 3 seed, they'll instead be the 11 seed or the 12 seed, which makes a lot more sense. So off the bat, the first four teams make sense. It's after LSU, everything starts to fly off the handle. And I just want to get into the fact that USC is ranked 6th, and they're quickly followed by Penn State, Florida State, and Clemson. 3 teams that, quite frankly, do not belong there at all. I don't even think Florida State should be in the top 25. I don't think Penn State should be in the top 20, and I don't think Clemson should be in the top 15. In
That's
my
just
eyes.
wild. That is
I think
wild.
our problem is, and this
Wild.
is a really good a really good example of this is Wemby in the NBA right now. People are hyping up these teams and these players before they even get the chance to play, and it makes no sense. And then by that logic, it's like, okay, well then why do you have teams like Tulane, Wisconsin, Oregon, and Notre Dame so low on the list? Because by that logic, it makes no sense after that. Because again, I've
Oregon's not
said
even
this.
that low.
We shouldn't be
Okay.
15.
Here, let's do this. Let's do this.
That's the bottom half.
Okay, no, pause. Let's start like this. Okay. So the top four you
Oh.
agree with, right?
Yes, top four I agree with.
Okay. Top four
LSU,
you
I want to agree with, but
LSU is fair at 5 because they
it's
have
a
a
top
solid
10 team.
defense.
Jaden
Yeah,
Daniels
they
is
have
going to do amazing things this year.
yeah, they have I think they have I think I forgot his name, but they have a solid linebacker and their
Yeah.
defense was really good last year. And Jaden Daniels at quarterback, dual
Yeah.
threat quarterback. He's like
Yes.
one of the best quarterbacks they've had besides Joe Burrow in the last 10 years. So their offense, if they still have a ton of skill position players, they always have a ton of skill position players. Their
Yes.
interior lines are always good. So LSU is going to be a solid team. They just need to. There's something off last year. Like they were 9-3. They beat Alabama, or I think they were 9-3, but they beat Alabama. But at the end of the year, they kind of tailed off. They had that terrible performance against Tennessee at home. So they had some
Yep.
up and down performances, but I think they're going to be a good team. But after that, it's a little sketch. USC at 6 is perfectly fair because
Mhm.
Caleb Williams is the best player in the country. Their offense is going to be the best offense in the country. And
Mhm.
their defense, they've gotten some transfers. They have a lot of talent on defense. They need to figure it out. I don't think they're gonna figure it out on defense because Lincoln Riley has never had a good defense in his career. I
Yeah.
don't think they're gonna have a good offense. No, I don't think they're gonna have a good defense because their offense is also so good. They score so quickly that you're always going to be putting your defense back on the field. If you can't judge it by based on how many points they give up because the other team's going to have a ton of possessions. It's just based on how well they can limit the damage. Okay. They're not going to have a star-studded defense like Georgia or sometimes Alabama had, where they just give up like freaking 3 points a game and they win like 50-3. Like that's just not going to happen with USC. USC is going to win games that are high scoring games. They're not going to have a top tier defense, but if their defense is good enough to hold off other teams, they're going to win games. Okay.
Yeah.
So USC at 6 is fine. Penn State at 7, I don't have a massive issue with because last year they beat Utah in the Rose Bowl. They always have a really top tier defense. If you look at their schedule, it's not that difficult. They have to go play at Ohio State. They're going to lose that game, but they play Michigan at home. If they win that game, they're in the running to win the Big Ten. So they can win the Big Ten. They have the hype with their quarterback Aller. They have some hype. James Franklin is a good coach. The problem with Penn State every single year is that their offense is just not dynamic. Okay. They always have a decent running back. They have occasionally a good wide receiver here and there. Like they had KJ Hamler a few years ago. They have some guys. They don't have enough size and speed on the outside. Their tight ends are usually good, but their exterior receivers, their outside receivers are never good enough. And their quarterback is never good enough. I mean, they had McSorley, they had Sean Clifford. They're not near the level of the top teams in the country. And to actually compete for a championship, you need a top tier quarterback. We saw this with Michigan last year. JJ McCarthy had a great year, but when he played badly against TCU, they just lost. Like you can't be a great team and not have a good quarterback and win. Stetson Bennett, as much as everyone wants to roast him, he did a good job managing the game, and Georgia's defense and all the talent they had was so much superior to every other team that he didn't have to be perfect. Okay. So that's a single case. You can't relate it to anything else. So Penn State, I'm fine with at 7. I just don't think like their season this year. Like what's gonna happen? They're probably going to lose to Michigan and Ohio State. They might beat Michigan at home, but they're going to lose to Ohio State at Ohio State. They're going to lose 2 games. They're not going to make the Big Ten championship game, and then they're going to go play in the Rose Bowl if Ohio State and Michigan make it to the college football playoff. So Penn State's the same thing every year. They always are a solid team that has a great defense, a decent offense that's not good enough to compete for a national championship. So I don't think Penn State. I have no issue with Penn State at 7 because it's like after the top 4. Because look at the teams that are ranked ahead of. Florida State is a joke. I'm going to get into this right now. Florida State at number 7.
Hang on. Before we get into Florida State, bro, with Penn State.
Okay.
All I'm looking at last year is a blowout loss against Michigan.
Yeah.
Lose by 2 scores to Ohio State. They opened up their season against Purdue, who Purdue went on to the Big Ten championship game and got absolutely shut down by Michigan, and they only beat Purdue by 4 points. And
Purdue was in the Big Ten championship game last year.
Yeah, against Michigan. It was Purdue. That's how lopsided the Big Ten is right now.
I mean, that's about with the Big Ten. Like, because you honestly don't even know. It's always Iowa, Wisconsin, or Purdue, or some dumb team like even Northwestern, bro.
And you look at the rest of their schedule. They had Ohio, Auburn, and as we all know, Auburn last year were dreadful. Central Michigan, Northwestern, Minnesota, Indiana, Maryland, Rutgers, and Michigan State. And most of those games were played at home.
Yeah, but even this year, their schedule's not hard either. They're going to win games because their schedule's not hard.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they're 7th seed. Like,
why
they're
not?
always going to be the same team because as soon as they get blown out to Michigan or to Ohio State, then the question gets asked every single year. Oh,
they beat Utah.
Penn State so high.
They beat Utah in the Rose Bowl, which is the reason that they're ranked higher than the Pac-12 teams.
Yeah, because
if Utah
Utah shouldn't even won the Pac-12 championship game.
Exactly, but also not only that, Cam Rising got hurt during the game. Cam Rising missed half of the entire game because he was hurt. So it's also that was a bad look for the Pac-12 in that singular game. But whatever. Penn State, fine. Put them at 7. Put them at 10. I don't care. Penn State is the 3rd best team in the Big Ten, and it's a pretty clear, obvious margin between there. They might beat Michigan. I don't think that they will, but it's going to be a big game. Hopefully that's the whiteout game, but we'll see. But
I'll put money that they lose to Michigan State at Michigan State.
They might. They honestly they might lose some like stupid game, which they shouldn't lose, but they might. Yep. At number 8, Florida State is the most ridiculous ranking I've seen in like the last 10 years. I mean, Florida State won the national championship against Auburn in 2013. In 2014, they got their ass handed to them by Oregon and Marcus Mariota. Jameis Winston had no answer. And since then, it has been a steady decline. Florida State has been irrelevant for the last 10 years. Then what happened is Jordan Travis comes in last year. They have a mediocre year. I'm not sure what their record was. I think they were 9-3 or 9-4. They were just an average team, right? And let's look at their schedule last year. I think they beat LSU in that beginning crazy game where they missed the PAT by 1 point. Yeah,
at home. at
No,
home
no, no. It wasn't at
to
home. It
a
wasn't at home.
yeah, it
It was
was. It
it was
was
in New
at
no,
Florida
it
State.
was New no, it was in New Orleans. It was in New Orleans. It was at the Superdome in New Orleans. But it was like a dumb it let me see their schedule. I want to see their schedule from last year because I just
It was 24-3. They beat LSU by 1 point, and an LSU team that was god awful last year. Then they
no,
beat
no, LSU was
Louisville
good last
at
year. Okay,
Louisville by
okay, this is what
4.
happened. This is what happened. So they beat Duquesne. They beat LSU by 1 point in New Orleans. But LSU at the beginning of the year, LSU was just trying to find their footing with Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly was first year coaching LSU. Jaden Daniels was struggling at that point. And if
Mhm.
they played LSU later in the year, LSU would have won that game by 3 scores. Okay. So that was a fluky win at the beginning of the year. They went to Louisville, who didn't have a good year. They beat Boston College. Then they lost 3 in a row to Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson. 2 of those games at home. So they lost 3 games in a row at
And
home.
and the funny thing, all three of those teams ranked at the time.
Yeah, they lost to 3 ranked teams. 2 of the 3 games were at home, and they lost those games against the good teams. Then they played Georgia Tech, who finished under 500, Miami, who finished under 500, Syracuse, who lost 6 of their last whatever games, and then Louisiana Lafayette, mid team, and Florida had a losing record. Oklahoma had their worst season in like 30 years. They beat them.
Yep.
So if you look at the schedule, they didn't beat one good team the entire year. LSU at
Yep.
the beginning of the season was their best win, and that was before LSU was playing like the team that they were at the end of the year. It
And they
wasn't
only
a
beat
good
them by one
comparison.
point.
They beat them by 1 point on a
And it's
lucky
because
missed
they messed up.
PAT.
It's because they
And
messed
that was
up.
also during that game, Florida State was up by like 2 scores
Yep.
at the end of the game, and then they let LSU back in the game, and LSU
Yep.
was just finding their rhythm. Like LSU was so bad that game, and they still only lost by 1 point. So that's just what I'm saying. They're returning all these guys. They had a good transfer portal, but
Mhm.
they're not that good of a team. They're just not
Nope.
that good. They're in a terrible conference. They have to play this year. They play LSU again. They're gonna get throttled in week 1 by LSU. I'm telling you, LSU will throttle Florida State in week 1. It's gonna
Yeah.
be a blowout. I'm calling LSU by at least 2 touchdowns. Then they
Yeah.
have to play at Clemson in week 4. I don't think Clemson's that good either. I think Cade Klubnik is overrated, and I think that defense is good, but their offense has been struggling since Deshaun Watson left and since Trevor Lawrence left. But in my opinion, Clemson's winning that game. It's at Clemson. There's
Yeah.
no shot Florida State is going to go to Clemson and win that game. So already they're going to lose 2 of their first 4 games. They're out of the college football playoff picture. Then they're going to win probably the majority of the rest of their games because they don't play anyone, bro. They play
Yeah.
Virginia Tech, Duke, Wake Forest, Pitt, Miami, whoever this bummy UNA team is, and then Florida.
North Alabama.
North Alabama. Exactly. Let's say some BS shit. And then they play Florida at Florida.
They're
The
losing that
only
game.
tough game in that stretch is Florida at Florida. They're probably going to lose at Florida, even though Florida's not that good of a team. They're fine. So I think Florida State's
They'll-
totally overrated. They have no shot.
They'll lose at Pitt too. They'll lose at Pitt as well.
Pitt is a tough game on the road every year. Even if Pitt's
Yep.
not good, Pitt is always a tough team on the road. I actually think that they can easily lose 4 games with this easy schedule. Like I would not be surprised if they finish this year 8-4 with this easy schedule. So I'm not taking Florida State seriously at all. The fact that they're ranked at 8, they should be right now at like 18, 19, 20 at the highest. This is ludicrous right now.
Yeah.
Their coach is not Mike Norvell is a mid coach, nothing special at all. There's no reason that they should be. Jordan Travis is the most overhyped quarterback in the country. Drake May is a solid QB. Caleb Williams is good. Penix is good. Bo Nix is good. Jordan Travis could not do anything against NC State, Clemson, or Wake Forest. They couldn't do
Forest.
anything.
Yep.
They couldn't move the
Yep.
ball. Okay, so I
Yeah.
don't want to hear all this crap. They're not that good of a team. Clemson
I
at
think-
number 9. I understand the history.
It begs the question for Florida State because I genuinely think we're looking at a Florida State team that could potentially lose all of its away games except for one. And I say all of its away games. They only go on the road 5 times.
Yeah, they play
compared
5 road
to
games
the 7 times that they're at home.
at home. Or I think the first game against
It's
LSU is
neutral.
probably it's neutral. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's at Camping World. Yeah, it's in North Carolina.
So
So-
you've got 6 home games, and they're against the teams that kind of matter, except for Florida. And you're
Yeah.
just playing a bunch of washed teams. That Clemson game, you're screwed. You're not winning that game.
Yeah.
You can lose to Wake Forest, you can lose to Pitt, and you can lose to Florida. And by God, I hope they lose to Boston College too, because it'll
Yeah.
really set in stone that this committee is off their goddamn rocker.
This isn't the committee.
the
This is just the
time.
AP. This is just the writers.
Yeah.
The writers don't know what they're talking about.
It just makes no sense.
Yeah, the college football, they don't know what they're talking about. Number 9, Clemson. Again, Clemson has a good defense. Cade Klubnik is a highly recruited quarterback out of Texas,
Yeah.
but I just don't think. I mean, they don't deserve this ranking based on the way they performed the last few years. They lost to Tennessee in the bowl game when Hendon Hooker wasn't even playing. They lost to Notre Dame the last few years, even though Notre Dame has not been that good. And
Yeah.
I just don't think Clemson's that special this year. I mean, Clemson this year, let's take a look at their schedule. They play at Duke, which it's another easy road game. Charleston Southern, FAU. They play Florida State, at Syracuse, Wake Forest, at Miami, at NC State, Notre Dame. Like, they don't play anyone. They play North Carolina at home. At South Carolina is going to be a tough game at the end of the year. I think
They even play
Spencer
Notre Dame
Rattler.
at home. They even play Notre Dame at home.
Yeah, and they even play Notre Dame at home. Notre Dame this year, I actually think is going to be an underrated team because
Yeah,
they
without a
have
doubt.
Sam Hartman is a good QB. He was from
Yes.
Wake Forest,
Yes.
and he was such an underrated transfer. That guy was one of the best QBs in the country. He was low key in the Heisman talk in like week 5-ish. Like, he was
He
a
did
very
well.
good
He
QB.
did well at North Carolina. Like, let's be real. And even Wake
He did
Forest,
well.
he was okay.
He almost beat Clemson. They almost beat Clemson last year. It
Yeah,
wasn't even his fault. They
exactly.
dropped like 35 points. He's a very good QB, and they had Notre Dame could not do anything with their QBs last year. If they have a solid QB, they always have a good offensive line. They always
Yeah.
have good tight ends. Their
Yeah.
wide receivers are decent. Hopefully they'll get better this year. Their defense is always solid. So I think Notre Dame could be a dangerous team this year. They're not going to make the playoff, but they can make it hard for USC, Clemson, and Ohio State this year. And
Yeah.
I think that they could steal a few games.
I
Washington
think,
at 10.
I think Clemson, because what I always think back to when I think about Clemson coming into the season is their ACC championship game against North Carolina, because they were going to lose that game had they not replaced DJU with Klubnik. Like with like that was it. Like the only reason why Clemson won that game was because they switched quarterbacks and North Carolina had no footage, no film on Klubnik at all because he literally hadn't played the whole season. And then you look at Klubnik's bowl game against Tennessee, he threw for 320 yards, but they only scored 14 points and got blown out by 20.
Yeah, that's
So
the thing.
I think, yes, like Clemson, I can understand why they're ranked so high, but as soon as we get to like week, like, it'll be that
Don't play anyone. They don't have any tough games.
It'll be that home stretch against Notre Dame, at NC State, against North Carolina, and at South Carolina that'll really show why Clemson shouldn't have been ranked so high in the first place, because
the only games that I genuinely think that they can lose are the games at South Carolina and at NC State, because they're not going to lose at home against Florida State. Florida State's overrated. They're playing in Death Valley. They're not going to lose that. They play Notre Dame at home. Notre Dame might give them some trouble. Maybe Notre Dame could go to Clemson and win, but I don't think they're gonna, because it's in Clemson, and always a night game in Clemson's brutal. Then, I mean, North Carolina's not going to go into Clemson and win. North Carolina doesn't have a good defense. I know Drake May is solid, but they have no defense. They're going to get absolutely
because that'll be the ACC championship rematch right there.
It's gonna be the rematch right there. Clemson is gonna have a good record this year. I just don't think they're that good of a team. I think that they're lucky that they're
in a few losses.
Yeah, they're gonna have a few losses. They're gonna win most of their games, but I just don't think they're a good team. I think they have an easy conference. I think they had a lucky schedule this year. At number 10, this is the biggest problem I have. Washington is not Washington beat Texas in the bowl game. They ended the year strong last year. They are not the second best team in the Pac-12. Okay.
Yeah.
They are just not the second best team in the Pac-12. I understand they have Penix. They have their good wide receiver. They have a Dunze. They have good receivers, but their offense is way too reliant on passing the ball. And if they can't protect Penix, it's over for them. Their defense is always decent, but it's not anything special. And if you look at it, the other teams in the Pac-12 that are behind them, Utah, Oregon, UCLA, and Oregon State. Okay. Oregon State has probably the best defense in the Pac-12. Them and Utah have the best defenses in the Pac-12. Just in the last year or two, the two best defenses in the Pac-12 are Utah and Oregon State. And in the Pac-12, the defensive teams always win because the Pac-12 is such an offensive I can't speak. The Pac-12 is such an offensive conference that if you have a good defense, it makes a big difference, because a lot of these teams don't have good defenses. So it makes a big difference when you have a good defense in the Pac-12. That's why Utah always wins the Pac-12 championship, even when they don't have great regular season. So Utah is a little underrated for me. Oregon, slightly underrated for me. Oregon State is kind of underrated for me, because if DJU can return to what he did in his freshman year at Clemson, at Oregon State, if they have any kind of quarterback at Oregon State, they have a good running game and a good defense, I think Oregon State can be a big problem this year. And Washington's schedule is brutal. Okay, they play at Michigan State. They play at Arizona, Oregon at home, at Stanford, Arizona State at home. Those are relatively easy games. Then they play at USC, Utah at home, at Oregon
At
State. They're going
Oregon
to
State.
lose at USC, at Oregon State, and Utah might beat them at home. So I could easily see Washington having 4 losses this year, and
Yeah.
I would not be surprised at all. No shock there at all. So I think Washington is just overrated right now because they beat Texas in the bowl game in the end of the year. I think 11-2 last year. I think they got lucky with that game at Oregon. Oregon should have won that game. They blew it at the end. If they didn't win that game,
we had terrible time management that game.
If Oregon
had
managed that game better, Oregon would have been in the
won.
Pac-12 championship.
Yeah.
Washington would have never been in a better bowl game. Washington right now will be ranked 23rd right now if they didn't win that one game at Oregon. So I think that Washington is totally overrated right now. I think they have a good QB, but I don't think they're that special. If we remember last year, I know UCLA had a bad end of the season, but UCLA gave it to Washington early in the year with DTR. Like we let Washington back in the game at the end of the game, but we were up by 20 points in the third quarter. Washington's defense is a big question mark. Texas at 11 is also ridiculous because Texas has never proven that they're worthy of the spot that they're ranked. Okay. Texas almost beat Alabama last year, even though Quinn Ewers got hurt and Hudson Card got hurt. But they didn't win the game. Alabama last year was the worst that they've been in a long time. They were handing the game to Texas. They were playing a terrible game, and the Texas Longhorns still found a way to let the game slip away. And when it was clutch time at the end of the game, when they needed to get it done, they couldn't get it done. And then they lost to TCU. They got that was an embarrassing game. I think they lost like 17-3 or 17-10. They just got absolutely
17-10, yeah.
They got absolutely crushed by just TCU. And TCU's defense was never that good. They always were known for scoring points. They just got absolutely halted by TCU's defense, which made no sense. And Texas always has a lot of talent. They always have the 5-star players, but they just don't have that identity. And Sarkisian as the coach, as good as he is as a recruiter and play caller, he's not a good culture coach. And you need a good culture coach, especially at Texas, where their culture has been lacking over the last decade plus. So I think Texas is going to be the best. They're the most talented team in the Big 12, but I could see TCU repeating this year as the best team in the Big 12 because I think it's just a mid-conference this year. I don't think there's any special teams there. And I just don't understand I understand they have Quinn Ewers, but what about Texas, besides the fact that they have a bunch of 5-stars, makes them deserve the spot? Tennessee was better than them last year. Like Utah and Oregon, Washington crushed them last year. Utah and Oregon are just as good as Washington. Like, there's no reason Utah, Oregon, and there's no reason they should be behind Texas. Texas should not be at number 11. Texas should be at the top. The highest that Texas should be right now is like maybe 17 or 18. Texas is always like Texas this year is probably like a 9-3 kind of team, maybe 10-2, but I just don't see it with Texas. I always think that they're overrated. Quinn Ewers is a good quarterback, but they always just make dumb decisions. They have stupid letdowns at the end of the games. They don't manage the clock well. They're just not a smart, savvy team. So I don't like Texas at all. Tennessee, I'm not an expert about Tennessee. I know that they lost Hendon Hooker. They lost Jalen Hyatt. They lost basically the main parts of their offense from last year. They have the quarterback coming in who has some talent, but I just think Tennessee is going to struggle compared to what they did last year. They don't have a terribly tough schedule being in the SEC East. They have to play Georgia, which is going to be a tough game. They're probably going to lose. They have to play at Alabama. They're going to lose. They have games like at Kentucky and at Missouri, but I think th're probably going to go 9-3, 10-2. They have to play at Florida, tough game. So I think Tennessee is going to fall back from what they did last year. I think last year was an outlier. They had Hendon Hooker, who had a really good year.
Yeah.
They had Jalen Hyatt. They had that lucky performance against Alabama with a field goal. Like, they had some lucky things happen last year, but they got absolutely trounced by Georgia. I just don't think Tennessee is going to be able to live up to what they did last year. I think they're going to be from 10-2 to 8-4, just like a solid upper tier bowl team. I don't think they're in the college football playoff picture at all. I think they're going to lose to Alabama and Georgia, and that's that.
Yeah.
So I think Tennessee's there. Notre Dame, I am very intrigued. I think Notre Dame this year can be a problem. I think they can be a problem. I do not think they will make the college football playoff, but I could see them beating Ohio State at home because Ohio State has they lost CJ Stroud. They have a QB battle this year. We'll see who the QB is, but they have an inexperienced QB coming in. They always have tons of talent, but their defense in the last few years after Chase Young and Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa left has been a little weak. So if they aren't able to shore up those defensive problems, I think Notre Dame could win that game at Notre Dame. and that would just totally change the whole landscape of college football. I also think that Notre Dame could beat USC because USC is a very offensive team, and Notre
Hmm.
Dame at Notre Dame, if their defense is able to stop Caleb Williams at all, and they're
Yeah.
able to score points, because everyone's able to score points on USC. Even last year when Notre Dame went to USC at the end of the year, they were able to put up a few touchdowns. So I just think that at Notre Dame, they might be able to give up some of these top teams problems. They're going to have a hard time going to Clemson and winning, but I think that if it was in Notre Dame, I think I would pick them and beat Clemson all day, every day. So I think
Yeah.
they could be a solid team. They could, for them though, since they have such a tough schedule, I could see them going like 10-2 or 11-1, or
Hmm.
just absolutely like having a terrible year and going like 7-5 or 6-6. Like it's very, very up and down with Notre Dame. But I think that they could they can make it difficult for the upper tier teams like Ohio State, Clemson, and USC. I think they can ruin their seasons, but I don't think that their seasons can be anything special.
I think, and this is pretty controversial, but I think that their first game on a neutral site against Navy, I think that will really determine where Notre Dame is at. Because in my eyes, I can wholeheartedly see them losing that game. It'll be a close game, but I can see them losing that game.
If they played like
And
last year, remember they lost, I think, to Marshall
yeah,
and some just terrible teams that like they lost to like two terrible teams at home.
yeah,
So
they lost to Marshall at home, and then they lost to Stanford at home too.
yeah. So they had just two terrible performances at home, and they almost lost to Cal. I remember they almost lost to Cal also
Yeah, they beat
early in
them
the year.
by one score.
Yeah, and they
And
were
then
yeah.
yeah,
So they
they lost to Ohio State by 11. They beat BYU by 8. Um
they ended the year strong. What happened last
they
year?
beat there you go. They beat Navy last year 35-32. They only beat them by 3
Yeah.
points. I can
So
wholeheartedly see Notre Dame losing to Navy, and then that'll be them done for the rest of the year.
but the thing is, they're favored by 20 because they are a more talented team than Navy. But I feel like we'll see if they
Obviously.
beat Navy by like 2 or 3 to 10 points. We'll be like,
Yes.
oh, they're a solid team, but they're not as good as we thought they were. If they
Yeah.
blow Navy out, we're like, okay, Notre Dame is going to be legit this year. I think this is
Yes.
a game that we'll see the type of Notre Dame we're going to get this year. They, of course, last year they developed as the year went on, but we'll kind of see what kind of team we have to start the year
Yeah,
with their new
absolutely.
quarterback, Sam Hartman from
Yeah.
Wake Forest. So I think we'll see with them. Utah at 14. I mean, they're always the same team. They're always a very tough team. No athleticism on the offensive side of the ball from the receiver position. They always have good tight ends. They always have a good running game. Their quarterback, Cam Rising, is one of the toughest QBs in the nation, but he always gets hurt because he always runs the ball and it's just not safe. And then
Yeah.
their offensive line is always decent, mediocre, and their defense is they lost Phillips, the cornerback, to the NFL draft. They still have some guys. They always have a tough, hard-nosed defense. So that works in the Pac-12, which is relatively soft. I think they're going to have a solid season, but their schedule this year is brutal. They play
Mhm.
Florida at home, Baylor at Baylor, which is a very tough game. Then they have to play UCLA, Oregon State, USC, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, and at Arizona. I don't think Utah has it this year. I'm sorry. I mean,
Yeah.
they're probably going to beat UCLA at home. They're, in my opinion, I have Oregon State going to. I think Oregon State's going to beat them at Oregon State. USC is going to beat them at home.
Yeah.
Oregon, Utah. I think Utah will be able to beat Oregon just because it's in Utah. But
Yeah.
I think it's a tough game. And
You
then
you
they're
look
gonna
at you look at their schedule last year. They lost 3 games, right?
yeah
Well, yeah, they lost 3 games. They lost at Florida, at UCLA, and at Oregon. So just based off of that
yeah
information alone, they can't play on the road against
good
good
teams.
teams, or at least
Yeah
decent teams. So you're looking
yeah
at this at Baylor, that's a loss. At Oregon State, that's a loss. At
yeah
USC, that's a loss. And at Washington, that's a loss. You could
probably
even make
lost.
an
Yeah
argument that at Arizona, they could lose that game too, but that's a bit of a
yeah
stretch. But you're
that's a
already looking
stretch.
at 4 losses off the bat, and you still have to play teams like Oregon and
And
like
UCLA at home.
UCLA at
Yeah.
home. But
Like
and
Oregon and
those aren't
UCLA,
easy matchups
I think
either.
I think that they'll beat Oregon and UCLA at home, but one of those teams could pick them off. I mean, if they have one
Yeah,
one good game, like those teams are talented teams with good offenses. If Utah's offense has a bad game, who knows? But
yeah.
I just don't think Utah is really in the picture to win the conference this year.
No, they're not.
I don't understand why they're higher than Oregon State and Oregon. I don't get
Yep.
it. But
I mean, hey,
I think
all
they're
Oregon did last year was beat them by 3 points, but whatever.
and then Oregon again. they need to figure out their defense because their offense, and also not even their defense, but just their game management in general was not good
Yeah.
last year. I mean, they
Yeah.
had some just their talent was crazy. I mean, when UCLA played Oregon, Oregon throttled UCLA, but they kind of let UCLA back in the game when they shouldn't have. Like they looked like such a superior team. They scored on every single drive they had. They scored a touchdown. And for
Yeah.
some reason, it was kind of a close game at the end. It wasn't super close, but it was kind of close. It should have been like a 30-point game. It made no sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Oregon has a ton of talent on the offensive side. Bo Nix is a very good quarterback. Their offensive line is very solid. Their run game,
Mhm.
very solid. They have tons of athletes at the receiver position. So their offense is going to be fine. Their defense, though, it's solid.
Yeah.
They have athletes, but it's just eh. And
I
their
feel like
schedule this year, I'm
I
worried about Texas Tech. I am very worried
yeah,
about Texas
yeah.
Tech. I think
feel
that
like
that's a trap game.
The difference is this year is that I think Oregon, at least for this year, they have figured out that they don't need to play some big name SEC team in order to prove a point. Because last
Facts. They
year
don't
it
have
was
to play.
Georgia, a few years before that was Auburn, and they lose those games.
Yeah.
Now they're starting off their season against Portland State. And again, you mentioned that Texas Tech game at Texas Tech. That is very concerning. And that, Oregon could, start off strong against Portland State, walk into Texas Tech, and they can lose that game. But hopefully we're looking at, Portland State, obviously they win that. Then Texas Tech could be troubling. Then you look at Hawaii, Colorado, and then at Stanford. Historically, Oregon struggle at Stanford.
And Stanford's going to be terrible this year too. But the thing is, it always worries you in the Pac-12 because Pac-12, it doesn't work rationally. Okay.
Yep.
Stanford could be 1-10 and Oregon could be 10-1 and Stanford could win that game. That's what the Pac-12 doesn't make sense. Okay. So I'm worried about that Stanford game. The Colorado game, I think you're going to be fine because Colorado has this tough schedule at the beginning of the year. I think they might turn it on late in the year, but I think Colorado is going to struggle at the beginning.
Yeah.
At Washington is tough. I don't think Washington is as good as everyone's hyping them up to be. I think that they might beat Oregon because it's at Washington, but I would not be shocked at all if Oregon went to Washington and won that game. Like, not even a little bit. Washington State at home, W. Utah at Utah is probably a loss. USC at Oregon is going to be the biggest game in the Pac-12 this year, in my opinion, because I think, in my opinion, Oregon's going to be 1 or 2 losses heading into that game, and USC is probably going to be maybe undefeated, but probably 1 loss at that point, considering they have to play at Notre Dame and Utah at home. I think they're probably going to have 1 loss at that point, but I don't think there's any reason to be surprised if Oregon beats USC at home. I mean, Oregon at Autzen Stadium is impossible to win. I know they lost to Washington last year, but they had a crazy win streak there. They won like 30-something games there in a row. You don't win at Autzen Stadium. You just don't do it. It's not a good atmosphere to play in. And USC doesn't have a good enough defense to stop Oregon's offense. I could easily see Oregon winning that game. And then Oregon State at Oregon. Again, it's a rivalry game. You never know what's going to happen. I can see Oregon State winning that game, but I think Oregon will get back the revenge. Last year was a pathetic. They were up by 30 points and they let Oregon State back in and they lost the game. Embarrassing performance. So I think Oregon's going to come back with a vengeance this year. I think Oregon and USC are probably the 2 favorites in the Pac-12 for me this year. I'm not going to lie.
Without a doubt.
I think Washington and Utah. I think Utah might be there just because their defense and they manage the game really well, which is important. I just don't think they're as talented as these teams. That's what you saw with Penn State. They did not have nearly enough talent. They just got absolutely roasted by Penn State. But that's that with them. Who's after Oregon in the rankings? Let's see.
Kansas State. Kansas State. Big 12.
Kansas State, they lost Deuce Vaughn. They lost a few guys. They got throttled by Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. But I think they're a solid Big 12 team. Them and TCU, they're ranked 16 and 17. I think both of those teams are going to be solid. I would not be surprised if both of those teams finish ahead of Texas because Texas is always overrated. I think that Kansas State's always a solid team. They always are like a 8 to 9 to 10 win team, decent team. I think that they could be same thing with TCU. They have the good offense, usually like a lackluster defense, but it's good enough in the Big 12 to get it done. So I think those teams are solid. Oregon State's a very intriguing team for me because their defense was solid last year. I don't think they have the premier 5-star athletes that like Georgia and Alabama have, but their defense was very solid last year. Very, very solid. They held USC to under 20 points, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And that USC team was averaging like freaking 50 points a game. So their defense is very good. The thing that concerns me with them is that if DJU plays like a good QB, like a solid guy that can throw the ball, they're going to be a problem in the Pac-12, a big, big problem. But if they
Yeah.
have another year where their quarterback can't do anything, they just are not going to have enough offensive firepower to beat these teams because last year their quarterback could not throw the ball at all. When they beat Oregon, it was strictly Oregon turning the ball over and their running back running it down Oregon's throat. Every single play, Oregon State's going to run the ball. So if you can stop the run, you're chilling. But the problem
Yeah.
is that no one in the Pac-12 can stop the run besides Oregon State and Utah. So I think Oregon State's going to have a good year. I mean, they had their first 3 games are relatively easy. They play San Diego State at home, but they should win their first 3 games. At
Yeah.
Washington State is always a difficult game, but they should win. Utah at home, I could see Utah winning at Oregon State or Oregon State beating Utah. I don't know. That's a toss up for me, 50
Yeah.
50. Cal is probably going to be an easy game. Oregon State, UCLA, I mean, we'll see what UCLA is like at that point. UCLA's defense is terrible all the time. So unless UCLA figures out their defense, there's no reason to expect that they're going to go to Oregon State and win. But UCLA's offense is significantly better than Oregon State's offense. So if it gets into a high scoring game, UCLA will win. But in my opinion, I think Oregon State, right now, knowing what we know, their defense is just stronger than UCLA. So I think they'll probably win that game.
Yeah.
Oregon State at Arizona. Arizona always has a good offense. Again, their defense is kind of up and down. So, but Arizona at Arizona is a trap game. I think Arizona could beat Oregon State in Arizona. I think I could see that happening. Same thing with Colorado. I think that Colorado could beat Oregon State in Colorado. At that point in the year, Deion will have his team figured out. I love what Deion is doing at Colorado. I think that they don't have enough depth, but if their guys stay healthy, I think that they could win that game. Stanford, they're going to win. Washington at Oregon State, I could see Oregon State holding that down and winning that game, but that's, again, a toss-up for me. And then Oregon State, Oregon, again, another toss-up for me. I think Oregon will win considering it's in Oregon, but it's a Friday night game, though. It's a Friday night game, and Friday night Pac-12 nights, not it, bro. It's just, but I know. So, in my opinion, Oregon State, again, another team in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 this year is going to be wild. It's going to be wild. There are 6 teams that could end the year 11-1, or they could end 8-4. Like, it's just crazy to me what's going to happen in the Pac-12. Again, USC and Oregon are probably the 2 most talented teams.
Yeah.
Utah and Oregon State have the 2 best defenses. Washington is up there just because of their quarterback play, and UCLA has a great offense. And if they figure out their defense, they could be a problem. But all these teams are unproven. All these teams have clear deficiencies that we all know what they are. And if they prove that they can handle those deficiencies, they'll be fine. But I don't trust any of them to handle them because I just think they're all solid teams that aren't good enough to make the playoff.
Yeah.
Then we have Wisconsin. And Wisconsin.
Oh my God. All of these next
in my
teams,
opinion,
Wisconsin, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Iowa. They don't
in
belong
my
in
opinion,
the top 25. They
yeah,
don't belong in
the
the top
fact that
25.
UCLA is not in the
Isn't
top
there?
25 behind Wisconsin, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Mississippi, Texas A&M, Tulane, and Iowa. Guys, I know that no one wants to pay attention to the Pac-12 and UCLA, and I know UCLA's defense is always terrible. I understand that. Okay, Latu is one of the best defensive players in the country, so that's the minimum. At least we have one good defensive player. And then the UCLA's offense is going to be great this year. We have Dante Moore, a 5-star quarterback, the top quarterback recruit in the country. We have J. Michael Sturdivant, who's one of the top receiving transfers. We have Carson Steele, who's the top running back transfer. We always have a solid offensive line. Chip Kelly's a good offensive coordinator. So he's good at calling plays. I know as a coach, he can make some mistakes with just the time management and things like that, kind of like the same issue we're saying with Texas. But UCLA's offense is way better than all of these teams except North Carolina. And North Carolina has 0 defense as well. So North Carolina and UCLA are basically the same team. Whatever. And Oklahoma had a terrible year last year. I don't understand why people expect them to just get better randomly out of nowhere because they didn't have a good year last year. What's to say they're just going to change it all? They didn't get any special players. Yeah, nothing that special. Wisconsin is the same every year. They always win all their games in the Big Ten West, is it? Yeah, the Big Ten West. They always win all their games there because those teams are trash. They go play Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. They get throttled. They go to the Big Ten championship game and they get throttled. So Wisconsin, in my opinion, I don't see anything special. I think that they're probably an 8-win team at the maximum, maybe 9 wins.
They'll still make it to the Big Ten championship.
They'll still make it to the Big Ten championship game and get absolutely destroyed by whoever they play. And then Ole Miss,
probably Michigan.
Lane Kiffin, dude, Ole Miss, They are just, no. Like, let's look at their schedule. I don't think their schedule is easy either. Let's see. They play Tulane at Tulane. That's a loss. Guarantee it. Ole Miss at Tulane, L. Alabama at Alabama, L. LSU at home, L. Auburn at Auburn, L.
Yeah.
Texas A&M at home, W. Georgia at dude, they're fucked. Ole Miss is fucked. Holy shit. Oh my god. Okay. Tulane, Alabama, LSU, Auburn, Georgia, Mississippi State. They're gonna go 6-6. Ole Miss is not. Oh, this is a joke. Ole Miss, get out of the rankings. Texas A&M had the best recruiting class in the country last year and somehow sucked. So I think this year they might be a top 25 team, but they never have good quarterbacks. Never. Everyone wants to say Johnny Manziel. Texas A&M never has good QBs. They always have like Kellen Mond was their guy. Kellen Mond is an average QB. He played with a bunch of talent on that team, and they had a decent offense. Their offense was never special. It was always the defense that carried the load. At LSU is an L. Ole Miss at Ole Miss, probably an L. South Carolina, tough game. At Tennessee is probably an L. Alabama at home, probably an L. Like they're gonna go like 9-3, maybe 8-4. Like Jimbo's a good, decent coach, but I don't see it with Texas A&M. Tulane had a great year last year. They beat USC in the bowl game. They had a great year in the regular season. So Tulane's a tough team, but I mean, Tulane has been good for 1 year, guys. Like, come on, let's be real. Like, Tulane is
Cincinnati,
never.
they're
It's it's like one of those kind of things. So they're gonna win these games against these weak teams that they play. They're probably gonna win a ton of games. They might go like 10-2, something like that, but they're not anything that special. And then Iowa has the worst offense that's ever existed in college football history. This team literally plays in games that end 7-3 and 6-3, and like they don't know how to score touchdowns. Okay, they don't have a quarterback. They don't have an offensive identity. Their defense is always good with all these freaking massive ass farmers from Iowa, so they'll be fine on the defense. But I just don't see it, man. I think that just like Wisconsin, Iowa or Wisconsin will play in the Big Ten championship game, get throttled by Michigan or Ohio State, and then the Big Ten it's just a joke. So I mean, yeah, I know like they're gonna lose at Penn State. They're gonna lose at Wisconsin probably. That Wisconsin and Iowa game is gonna decide who's playing in the Big Ten championship game. They play at Iowa State. Like they're just trash. I mean, they're just like who like they don't play Michigan or Ohio State this year. If they did, they'd probably lose. Like it's just whatever. Screw Iowa, irrelevant. Texas Tech is right outside the rankings. I think that Texas Tech and South Carolina should have been in the rankings. I think that the three top vote getters in the poll, Texas Tech, South Carolina, and UCLA should have all been in the rankings ahead of like
Wisconsin, Oklahoma, Ole Miss,
all these guys. Like South Carolina ended the year strongly last year with Spencer Rattler. They beat Tennessee. They beat they beat Clemson? Did they beat Clemson? Or there was a tough game or something? I think they beat Clemson.
If I'm not in the bowl game?
No, they played Clemson in the regular season. Let's see.
Oh yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah, they beat them 31-30 at Clemson at Death Valley.
Yeah, so they beat Clemson last year. They beat Tennessee last year. So they had some big wins last year at the end of the year. I think that South Carolina could be a problem. And I mean, otherwise, Texas Tech has probably had like a solid defense considering they're in the Big 12. UCLA has good offense. UTSA is getting so much hype, and I don't understand why. I don't know a lot about UTSA, but we'll see how they do. Arkansas has a brutal schedule. They're not going to do anything. Boise State's the same thing. Pittsburgh is outside the rankings. I think Pittsburgh's going to give a problem to a few ACC teams that think they're hot shit. I think that Pittsburgh is going to win a few home games. Yep. But I think the rankings are stupid in general because college football is so unpredictable.
Yep.
To have these dumb preseason rankings is kind of ridiculous because I bet in the first week, like 6 or 7 of these teams are going to freaking just have terrible performances and they might even lose to these terrible teams. So we'll see what happens. But I think these are pretty lousy rankings. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I think that they've severely underrated. They've messed up the Pac-12 rankings. Those rankings don't make sense in the Pac-12. The Texases of the world, Florida State, Clemson are a little overrated. Yeah. Some of these teams are just unproven, and then like the end of the rankings are just dumb. Like Wisconsin, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Tulane, and Iowa. Maybe 2 of those teams are good enough to be ranked, but I just don't think they deserve the ranking right now. They haven't proven it. So, I mean, we'll see. I think in college football, it always happens. A lot of teams are unproven. We have to see what they're going to show us. But I think honestly, I think we all know who's going to win the national championship. It's going to be one of these top four teams,
Yep.
and maybe someone. But it's going to be one of these top, probably three even. I don't think Alabama is good enough anymore to win. I think that they've kind of fallen off a little bit. I think they're good.
Yeah.
I just think they've fallen off a little bit. I think Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, those are the favorites right now. If Michigan is able to just have a little more dynamic of an offense
Hmm.
and not be make such like their defense was so good the entire year last year, and then they played TCU, they gave up 50 points.
Yeah.
Like what are you doing? So if their defense continues to like improve, I think Michigan has like probably one of the most talented teams in the country. Georgia, cupcake schedule. They have a new quarterback. They still have a ton of talent everywhere else on the field, so they'll be fine. Ohio State always has good receivers. Their defense is physical. If their defense improves, they'll be a top tier contender. They almost beat Georgia, almost won the national championship last year. Alabama, same kind of thing. They can easily win the national championship, but I think they're a little bit below them. And then LSU and USC are the dark horses, in my opinion. But otherwise, I don't think anyone outside the top six is going to win the national championship, unless you have like a team like LSU that in 2019 that just came out of nowhere, or like some team like that. But I just don't see it. I don't see any other team besides the top six winning the championship this year.
Yep. Wholeheartedly agree. The rankings are, they're never perfect, but there definitely are opportunities for them to get it as close to perfect as possible. And yet, here's another example of how, like they still managed to not only mess up the rankings, but mess them up so bad that it just like, it makes you question everything. I think there are too many Big 12 teams on here. I think there are too many ACC teams on here. I think Tulane is ranked way too low, even though, yes, they are Tulane and they play in one of the weaker conferences. They still made a name for themselves. And not only that, but they beat USC in their bowl game. So that has to count for at least something. And this is still a USC team who had a healthy Caleb Williams because he was back from that Utah game and he was fine and they lost that game. So, that begs the question. But, my biggest thing is that if you have USC 6, then you could argue the fact that 7 should be Washington, then Oregon 8, Utah 9, Oregon State 10, and then also
Why
have
is
UCLA in
Washington?
there.
But why is Washington ahead of Oregon and Utah?
Well, they beat Oregon. They can beat
I don't
Oregon again.
care.
They'll
I
beat
don't care.
Oregon
They won
again.
that one game by one possession. It wasn't like they were a
They'll,
significantly better team.
yeah, but they'll beat them again. That's all that matters. All that matters is they'll beat them again.
You
Washington
think
is
you
still
think
good, and Penix is still a good QB. He's not that good. He's not a top 10 college football team.
everyone's saying he's gonna win the Heisman, and I'm like, bro, he's not winning the Heisman.
No,
Like
but
you can end that, bro.
based on this logic, yeah, Washington should be a top 10 team and they should be ahead of Florida State and Clemson because again, these teams haven't played yet. We're just hyping them up. Whereas all these Pac-12 teams, it's the same team that they had last year. Literally
And
the exact same team.
they had good seasons.
Left.
All these teams had good seasons. Like UCLA had the worst out of all of them, and UCLA ended 9-4. All these teams ended the year with 10 wins, 9 wins, 10 wins, 11 wins. Like they were all solid teams. So I just don't. They always hate on the Pac-12, but that's fine. I don't really care. Whatever, they can hate on them all they want, but the ACC is worse. So I mean, they could keep hating on them, but we love the haters.
We love
that's
the
gonna do it.
haters. That's gonna do it. That's gonna do us for episode 41. Make sure to follow us on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, and Twitter as Dubs Only Sports. And make sure to watch the full episodes like this one on YouTube and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Feel free to comment, if you agree with some of the, picks that we made. If you want, give us your top 25. Why not? I mean, like
give us,
this definitely ain't it because as an Oregon fan, I know damn well Oregon should not be a 15 seed after we ended the year losing to Oregon State at home or at Oregon State in Corvallis and then beating North Carolina on a neutral site in San Diego. I know that doesn't add up. So that's cool. We'll see what happens. But for right now, that's going to do us. And we will see you in the next one, guys. Peace out.